I think, one of the other things that you and I have talked about and one of the things I think it's really interesting as we're learning and thinking more about this period, right, is, not to make this a story of uplift or triumph, right, but to also not make Black people just solely victims, right? Because there's obviously this systematic oppression that we're talking about. But one of the interesting things we also see emerging in Reconstruction is the sort of many forms of resistance, of Black resistance, right, against these sort of forms of white supremacy and of racial violence. And that means, in some places, that means in Alabama, that means the formation of Black militias, right? Of Black militia groups and armed resistance. In some places, that means a more sort of nonviolent resistance, right? Or even resistance that's based, as a really smart article by Michael Fitzgerald that I referenced earlier, that's based on sort of the threat of a Black majority in some places, say in the Black Belt, for instance. We also see briefly in this period, right, the rise of political resistance, right, of African Americans being elected to political office, and in that way being resistant to these larger structures of violence. But, I mean, and I think that's a sort of balance, right, with what you're saying, right, that we have to understand this period as characterized by both of those things, right, by this endemic ubiquitous violence, and also by this sort of emerging resistance. And I would say that those are actually really good ways of sort of marking two of the major themes in Alabama history. In Alabama's history from that period onward, right? And that we are going to continue to see both of those things kind of unfolding, right? That continued violence and those continued forms of resistance. And then I think, that's one of the ways that we have to sort of think about Reconstruction's legacy, at least for me, right, is how it helps to form those sort of frameworks kind of going forward.